Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining the Contemporary Music Centre's first in a series of continuing professional development events. We have the great pleasure of having Anselm McDonnell, who's a composer performer, with us today, and he is going to give a presentation on contemporary notation in Sibelius. It's obviously, a very specific area to composers, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about it, Anselm, before we actually hand over the presentation formally to you.
Yes, so I'm going to do a couple of things in today's presentation. Firstly, I'm going to go through an overview of some of the main features that I find helpful to use in Sibelius, how they work, and just show you where they are in the software so that you can start interacting with them and experimenting with them yourself. Then we'll spend a bit of time working on some of the questions that were sent in prior to this session, and I'll show you how I kind of went about addressing some of those problems. These aren't necessarily the only ways to approach these, and you might be able to find better ones, but this is the way that I've done it, and so hopefully doing that will be an example of showing you how I use some of these tools in Sibelius to achieve the results that you're looking for.
And as Anselm was saying, some people have submitted questions in advance as we asked them to, but other people will have questions that are inspired by Anselm's presentation. And just to let you know that this is part of a series of Contemporary Music Centre's continuing professional developments. They're all inspired by lockdown and by COVID-19 restrictions. And we surveyed our own composers and performers who are specialists in this area of contemporary music, and we try to work out what are the areas they would like. Obviously, online performances have become more common. They may be here to stay, they may not be. We're not making a judgment on that at the Contemporary Music Centre, but we certainly are going to be following Anselm's proposal with a trio of CPD events, one on creating online performances, second one on monetizing online performances, and finishing with marketing online performances. So I'll hand over now to the expert with us today, Anselm McDonnell, composer performer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda.
What I'm going to be talking about today is more helping you to figure out how to get around certain features in Sibelius, and being able to notate some of the ideas that we find it very easy to scribble down on paper, but to get them down into a notation software. Before we dive in, I thought I would just mention some of what my priorities are when it comes to typesetting a score. There's many different ways of communicating music, as you all know, through notation systems, graphic, image-based communication, text communication, or through physical gestures, embodied reflexes that have been learnt through improvisation. But whatever system or combination of systems you're choosing to communicate through, this is the channel through which you're collaborating with the other musician. Whether you're improvising together or you're a performer who's never met you places a copy of your music on a stand. So my concerns when working with any of these systems of communication between myself and another musician are: one, efficiency. Is this the most efficient system of communication? Is it the most suitable way of getting intentions across? Secondly, clarity. Is it clear throughout what is intended? And then thirdly, artistry. While the system itself is not the music, it's the means of realizing the music. And I believe it's important that we invest as much, art and imagination into this system as we do in the actual creation of the music. Is it visually professional? Is it artistic? My father's a visual artist, so that has influenced me quite a lot. But also I think it sends a message to the performers. Does it look good? Does it look interesting? Does it look as if whoever's written it has taken the time and the care to make sure it's done properly? When I set a piece of music on my stand, if I see things like page turns that have been well thought out, instructions that are very clear, maybe a couple of engraving nuances that are unique to the composer, then I'm already in a good mood. Whereas the opposite can happen if the score looks a bit haphazard or full of mistakes. It can hinder that communication between you and whoever is collaborating with you on your music. And all of this can be applied to staff notation, which is what we're going to be focusing on today, because we're talking about Sibelius, which is primarily a staff notation program, although you can do some elements of graphic notation in it. So just to run you down what kind of the structure of this session is going to look like. Firstly, I'm going to run you through some of the main tools that I use in Sibelius. If you're quite familiar with Sibelius, then nothing here will be overly new to you, but we'll try to get through that nice and quickly. Then secondly, we'll talk about problem solving in Sibelius and how I go about analyzing problems and finding solutions to them. Thirdly, I'll mention workflow efficiency briefly, although I have provided Linda with a handout, which you'll all be sent after this session, and that has some more information on workflow efficiency and just methods that I've thought of for speeding up how quickly you can typeset things. And then finally, we'll hopefully have some time for question and answer, though feel free to come up with questions as we're shooting along. Okay. Oh, that's too far. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the tools that we use in Sibelius. And if you'll excuse me for using my own score, just because it's something I happen to have handy. So here's the Sibelius layout. What we're going to be talking about is mostly things that happen up here. Hopefully you can all see my mouse moving along. Also, down in the right-hand corner of your screen, you'll be able to see any of the key commands which I type in. So if I do that, you should see a key command pop up in the right, and that'll let you know what I'm doing on the keyboard to get the result on the screen. So this up here, this band at the top is called the ribbon, and this is the main place where a lot of the magic in Sibelius happens. So we're firstly going to start with over in File and down here and mention the plugins bar. Plugins are little pieces of code that you can import into Sibelius which do extra features, and they can be quite useful. There's lots and lots of them online. You're not adding in anything that's just downloaded from a separate source online. This is all native to Sibelius, but it's people who've programmed a little feature that will do something in Sibelius, from really simple things like searching your score for all the accents, or more complicated things like coming up with chord symbols and so on. And if you're particularly computer minded yourself, you can actually program your own by going to edit plugins. So if you're familiar with computer programming, you could design your own plugin to do whatever you're trying to do. If I wanted to install a new plugin, I would click on it, click install plugins. It'll download the list of what plugins are available, and then I'll be able to kind of see what options there are, except being Sibelius, it's being really slow. Okay, here we go. So I'm just going to click on all plugins, and just to give you a couple of examples of kind of what various things do. So here's one I use a lot. If I click on this one, add fake bar lines to bars, and this is a little description which tells me what the plugin is going to do. So if I choose to install it, I will then be able to run the plugin from wherever I place it up in the ribbon, and that can do various things for me. So that will become useful later, depending on the kind of problem we're addressing. So it's worth bearing in mind that if there's something you're trying to sort in Sibelius, it's worth Googling to see if there's a plugin that already does it for you, because you might be able to just go over here, install a plugin, and go for it. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is the Home tab. Now, we're not going to go, when we're going through these, we're not going to go through everything. I'm just going to talk about the menus that I find particularly useful. So here, under the Instruments section, where we add our instruments or change our instruments, there's a little button here, which is Edit Instruments. And this menu can be quite useful if you are, say, for example, designing a percussion system for your score, or if you're trying to do aleatoric music, because you have various options here for changing instruments about. So you can either edit instruments that already exist, or you can make new instruments. So let's say, for example, I was making an aleatoric score and I wanted a flute in it, but I didn't want to have any bar lines. Okay, so I would select new instrument, a new instrument based on flute. Okay, and then I'm going to name it something that I'll recognize. You know, let's call it aleatoric flute. Okay, I can do various things here. I can actually give it 2 staves. which might be useful if, say, you're writing for a singing flautist or something and you wanted a separate line on which to notate that. Under Edit Staff Type is where we want to go for changing things like bar lines. So here, you'll see I have bar lines selected. If I click off on that, when I create the instrument, I will have an instrument that has no bar lines, but any other instruments in the score will have bar lines. So this can be useful if you're creating stuff which has maybe metered instruments and non-metered instruments at the same time. You can also change the number of staff lines. This can be useful if you're making a new percussion instrument for any reason, and you can change the gap between staff lines, although I don't do that very often. Under here, we've various sort of things we can do for different notes and rests. Again, if I was designing an aleatoric score, I might not want to have bar rests, and that saves me having to go through and delete them all at the end of the score. So I could create an instrument which is sort of specific to that. So these menus up here, if you're not familiar with them, are well worth kind of exploring and seeing what different options you have inside them. You can also edit instruments that already exist. I tend to create new ones just so I know that they're separate and keep them separate. Okay, the other thing that is very useful is this button here, hide or show. Okay, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It can hide most elements of your score or show them. So if I was to, let's see, would be something good to hide. Over here is an example. So this is something I might show you later, but to set up the percussion instrument here, I've had to provide notes to show where on the staff lines my percussion instruments are assigned. Now, to be able to put that in, I have to create a second voice in the instrument and then hide it. So what I would do is click on that, and then I can choose whether to hide it or to show it. You end up doing a lot of hiding or showing in Sibelius. So this is the shortcut here, Control-Shift-H. And you can do that for anything that's causing you bother and kind of getting in your way. For example, here, I've changed the instrument to a percussion instrument so that I can have the voice, and I've hidden the instrument change by clicking on it. I can still see it, so I can still select it and I can still apply things to it, but it's very handy to be able to do that. And then the other one just here is flip, which if you're looking for the keyboard shortcut is X, and this is very useful for just turning things upside down if you need to do it quickly. Okay, let's move on to the Note Input tab. Okay, here the main thing which is going to be helpful for us is triplets, okay? And that's because we can use triplets in a lot of different ways, not just for writing triplets. Triplets can be useful if you're trying to solve spacing issues. So I often end up using it in conjunction with the hide or show button, because I'll maybe create a triplet and then hide the triplet bar beneath the notes so that I can fit more notes than I need to into a particular space. So say, for example, I, for some reason, needed to write 5 crotchets in a space, but in another instrument, I needed to have 4 in that same time. Again, if it was non-metric and I wanted to be able to show that via spacing, I would do that with triplets. The most useful one here is Other, where you can specify whatever kind of weird rhythms you want, and it does. It's quite flexible. It does a lot of things, and if you use your imagination, you can think of sort of fun ways to kind of use it. The only other thing to point out here is the swap voices up here, which is if say you're writing a choral score and you decide you need some of the voices in your tab flipped around, if you select it and then hit swap voices, Sibelius will automatically put all the voice 1 notes into voice 2 and vice versa. Okay, let's move on to the notations tab. Now this is the tab which I use most often for customization. And this is very useful when writing new music, because you'll often need to come up with scores where you're maybe using custom note heads that aren't present in Sibelius, or you're trying to create new lines which Sibelius doesn't have, or maybe you're even trying to create new clefs and new key signatures. So for most of these, there'll be a little, let's see. I just need to get that out of the way so I can see. Under these menus here is where we can sort of edit what's going on in here. So for example, if I click on note heads, Sibelius has quite a lot of note heads preloaded that I can change about, which is quite nice. So if I wanted to make some of these triangles, I would scroll down and find some of the triangles, and I've got a lot of different options for what I could make it. So there we go. If I wanted to do something which was a little more complex, then I could create a new note head. So again, similar to the instruments, I can either edit what Sibelius already has existing, or I can start changing stuff around as I want. So say I wanted to make crossed note heads, but they had no stem. So I click on a new one, and this brings me up a new menu. I can call these note heads whatever I want. And then I have various options for things I can change. So if I want stemless note heads, but they're crosses, then I just unclick this button here. The other handy thing is this here, change symbol. And if I click on this, it will allow me to use any of the symbols that are already in Sibelius to create a new note head. So, I mean, this can be quite useful for comic effects. If I change it to that, I will now have a note head that is a set of glasses. Not that I would ever really need to use this, but just for sake of argument, let's see what it does. So now when I go into note heads and I go right the way down, oh, sorry, that was the wrong button. I should have hit that one. This is the button to change note heads here. And it's not going to load it for me. There we go. Okay, so you can do lots of silly things, but it also allows you to create note heads exactly the way in which you want, which is really handy. The next thing which is useful to know is the symbols menu here. And again, if we click on this, this allows us to see all the symbols that Sibelius already has loaded into it. Now, if we edit these, it changes them system-wide. So, for example, if I was to go down to note heads, if I do anything to this quarter note, every single quarter note in Sibelius or any symbols that use the quarter note will also be changed. So if I change this maybe to like a half diamond note head, that means every time this symbol is used, whether I'm making a crotchet or a semiquaver, it will become a half diamond note head. This menu is useful for loading in your own symbols. So if you come right down to the bottom under user defined and click and select new, then we can load in a graphic or we can create our own new symbol. So let's say, for example, we wanted to create a treble clef. We click on the treble clef and we put that in. We can then move this around and be kind of clever with this and do whatever we want. And we can add things to it. So let's, for the moment, let's make a custom key signature with microtones in it. Again, this isn't necessarily something you'll be likely to use, but just showing you how this works. So then I can move it around a little. Let's put it over the F. Okay, so there we go. There we've managed to make a key signature with a microtone in it. So let's call it that. And save it. Now, when I open my symbols menu, I will have this available to me and I can use it in my score. So the shortcut for the symbols menu is Z. And let's go right down to the bottom where all the user ones I have are. Okay, and here's my new clef. Okay. You can use this, so you could use this in a variety of different ways. If you input something into the symbols, you can then make it into a new note head and make your custom note heads. You could put it in to make a new key signature or a new clef. If I change, so for example, let's say I wanted to have 4 different kinds of clefs in my score. I would probably keep these main ones, but if there are any I'm not using, then I could change them to become the clef that I wanted. So for example, let's say I'm never going to use this clef in my score. I click on it, I edit it. Okay, I'm going to remove the little 8 sign. I don't want that. There's the treble clef. I'm going to give it a B sharp. Okay. Now, when I go back into my clefs menu, if I click on a note and I want to put a clef before it, I hit the Q to open clefs and I go down. And there is my rather silly looking new custom clef. And I'll be able to put that in. So this is very useful for just doing a variety of different things if you're trying to create new symbols. The other useful one menu on here is edit lines. And that's basically does the same as the others. Anything that's in the line menu, we can edit to become whatever we want, really. You can create new ones or you can edit old ones. So say, for example, I decide that, wait, let's see. So this one is quite useful, the box. I use this a lot. Let's say when I make a box, it's actually not wide enough for me. I don't like how thick the lines look. So I'm going to edit it. And here I can change how thick it is. So I'm going to make it quite thick. And you can see there it changes it. So whenever I create a box now, it's going to be it's going to have a fairly thick line. I can also change what style the line is in, and that gives me quite a couple of options, some which look better than others and some which just look slightly comic. You can also add things. This is where we would also create, say we wanted to create custom sort of crescendos or so on. Down here, at the cap, we can add things to the end of the lines. No, it's not going to do that because this is a box. Let's go back into line. So for example, let's say we wanted to edit our crescendo from niente to have arrows on the end of it. So it's going to do that at the one end. I want it to happen at the other end. So it's an arrow at the end of that. And we have some options for what kind of arrows we can stick on as well. Okay, so these menus are fairly customizable, and if you're trying to do something which is slightly unusual, the answer tends to be somewhere in here. This button is also great. This is to import a graphic. I do this a lot in Sibelius if I can't find what I'm looking for. So for example, these pressure lines here, for strings, these aren't native to Sibelius and you can't really make them in Sibelius without a lot of trouble. So I've actually made them in a graphics software and then I've imported them in from elsewhere on the computer. So if I click on the graphics tab, it will open file locations on my computer. And I can just select whatever I need to and put it into Sibelius and then, you know, resize it and move it around as I need, which is really handy. Okay, let's speed up a little. Under text tab, again, this is where it's helpful to be able to customize different things. We can edit text styles. So this is very helpful if you want to customize your score and maybe make your time signatures look really unique. You can change fonts and so on. So let's see, here's my time signatures here. I think in this score, I'm using huge time signatures. So I'm going to edit these. And here I have various options for what I can, you know, I could change the font. Also useful to know, actually, this is where under border, I can select erase background. And if I do that, then it will, if I do that, that's how I managed to get it. So my time signatures are masking off the slurs behind them, which is really handy because if you had to do this, in any other way, it would take quite a lot of time. And it looks a bit messy if all your slurs and so on are crossing your time signatures. Okay, not really going to talk about the play tab today because when we're making these kind of things in Sibelius, generally speaking, Sibelius is not going to play them back. This is purely for how to get the visual results. So it's not going to play back what we want to do. Under layout, this is where we get our main sort of document setup options. It's worth knowing that when Sibelius opens, it sets up the staff size as 7 millimeters, which is towards the larger end of what industry standard is. So generally speaking, we want to be between 6 and 7. 6.5 is normally quite a good staff size to go for. It just makes the score all look a bit tighter and a bit cleaner. But this will depend on, this is mainly for chamber music. If you're writing choral music, then it will be 4.8 to 5 meters, 5 millimeters, sorry, not 5 meters, that'll be insanely huge. And then for orchestral scores, for orchestral full scores, you can go smaller again. So 3.7 millimeters would be the standard. But just so you know that when you automatically open Sibelius, what it gives you is a little large. What else is good here? Hide and show empty staves. This again can be useful if you're doing aleatoric scores, or maybe say you've got a score that is a percussion instrument that has lots of different instrument options and you want to keep them all, but you know, you don't want to be able to see when they're not playing the xylophone for a long time, and so you can just hide that there. This is a really useful button to know. This is the magnetic layout. So if you're not familiar with this, Sibelius automatically tries to move everything away from each other to avoid collisions. If I turn this off, everything in my score will move around. It hasn't done it quite as badly as I thought, but you can see up here, okay, yeah, it has it over here. So over here, it's created a bit of a mess. It's moved my dynamic up over the top of my chords. It's moved my ledger line down here. So generally speaking, I either keep this on the whole time or I keep it off the whole time from the start of making the score till the end, because you don't know where it's going to mess things up. But for various objects, we will need to turn off magnetic layout individually. So if I select an object, you'll see here that it says default. And this means that Sibelius is preventing this object from making collisions with anything else. I want it to be off, okay? And the reason for this is then I can move things around in the way I want to make them look best visually, because there's sometimes things that Sibelius will move around and I don't want them to be moved around. I want to place them where I want. This will especially happen. So for example, I don't know whether it will do that for, yeah. So this line here, which is crossing a bar line and crossing through another stem, quite obvious to a performer what is being trying to be done, but Sibelius won't actually let me do it. So I have to make sure my magnetic layout is off to be able to do that. And this has a wide variety of applications and situations where you'll use it. I actually have it bound to a shortcut because I use it so much. Okay, and oh yes, just the other thing down here under these, you know, little buttons hidden off to the side is a very useful feature. This top one is make into system, and this next one is make into page. So if you're having layout problems, you can select a whole bunch of things and then make them into single systems or make them into pages, which is very useful if Sibelius has crammed all your music together in a way that you don't like. So let's say I'm going to make this into a page and it's stretched it out. It's forced only these 3 bars onto the single page. And I can just undo that with Control Z. Okay. Under appearance, we have engraving rules, which is where we get more fine details about how Sibelius is setting our score up. Generally things you won't need to change, although this is handy to know. This is where system separators is located. So that's, that can be quite useful if you're doing a chamber score and you have a couple of systems per page, because Sibelius won't put them in unless you come here and select how many staves you want them to appear under. This is where we can do fine tuning, such as how wide our bar lines are, how wide stems are. Sometimes, I'm not sure if we can change the note heads under here. We can also here change what time signatures our score is using. So if you want to switch from time signatures to huge time signatures and have the ones that sit above the whole score rather than in the instrument staff, it's done under here. And they have two different options, although you could also, as we talked about earlier, under text, you could also create a new time signature text if you wanted to do something particular. And there's various things we can edit here, such as lines and so on. So if you've never explored any of those menus, it's well worth getting, taking a bit of time to experiment with them and seeing what they do, because they give really great solutions. So the next thing just over here is two other things. One is a line in a row or a line in a column. If I have a lot of objects that are kind of moved all over the place, say for example, my dynamics are all skewed and I want them to be nicely lined up, rather than trying to click on them and just drag them all into the right place. So you'll see these dynamics aren't lined up, okay? So to be able to select them all, I hit Control, Shift, and A, and it will select all my dynamics for me. And then I want to align them in a row so that they're at the same height. And if I just click on that, Sibelius will bring them all into a line. Now, I'm not actually sure whether it will do it with the dynamic or not, because it might move them up to the level of dynamic. Okay, it has done that. That's nice. Okay, so there we are able to go. With not too much stress, I'm able to line up all my dynamics to look really nice. So that's great. And then the other thing on this tab is bring to front and send to back. This is mainly useful if you are doing a lot of graphics. So I'll take you over to where in the score I'm using a few more kind of graphics and where this kind of thing might become useful. Let's see. Okay. So here we've got a lot of things going on. And depending on what's happening and what we've kind of loaded in terms of symbols, sometimes it might be useful to have certain objects sitting on top of others. Okay, so if this, let's say, for example, if this graphic actually had white space all around it, it would be blocking off half of this. So I would have to set this graphic on top of the other one. So I can do that either by bringing it to the front and it puts it on layer 32, or I can just kind of specify where it is. So I could have this one on 28 and this one on 26. So I know that this object is above, or that should have been 27. This object is above this object. And that's useful if you're having to stack multiple graphics on top of each other, but you need to know what order they're happening in. Okay, and the final thing, and then we'll solve some problems, is, oh, I'm slightly blocked by the top of the zoom here, is under view, you can select staff rulers and object rulers. And this is a great thing to have on. Whenever I'm making a score, I have this on because it allows you to see the measurements of your whole score and kind of where things are. So if I was having layout problems, for example, I would want to have this on so I can see, are all my staves equidistant? Are they the same distance from the top, and so on? If I have, now, you can see these aren't very well done. For example, these numbers are not at the same height, but I can quickly see that. I can see this is 17.31 millimeters above the staff, and this one is 20.03. So I can bring that down to kind of around 17 and it will be aligned much better. So that's a really handy thing to have on. Okay, so those are some of the main windows which I will use when I'm problem solving in Sibelius. So let's talk for a moment about problem solving and how to approach a notation issue. The first thing I do when I'm looking at a notation problem is to analyze it and to break it down into separate elements, because if you just look at a notation problem that's quite complex, you can very quickly wonder, how on earth am I going to be able to do that? So I break it down into separate bits and figure out, okay, what steps will I need to do each one? Once I've done that, I then figure out the likely location of a solution. So can it be achieved with the features which are native to Sibelius, which Sibelius already has loaded in? I'm just going to close that one because we don't need it. No. No. Can it be achieved with a plugin? So a quick Google can certainly lead you to a plugin that might help. Or can it be achieved with an external resource? Do we need to bring in a graphic to help us? And then finally, we implement our solution. We just do whatever we figured out is the best way of doing it. Although it's worth remembering that your solution may require some reformatting when you put it into instrument parts, because Sibelius won't keep things in the same place. It'll start moving them around, especially if you've got lots of graphics and so on. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is trill notation. So these are all questions that people sent in. So to be able to put in a trill, we just need to select a note, hit L for line, and our line menu will come up, and we can enter a trill like this. Now, to enter a trill line that isn't just a semitone trill, because this just indicates a semitone trill, or a trill to the next note in the key signature if we're using key signatures, we want to put something above it to tell us what to trill to. So this can go either above, or it can go just to the right of the trill sign. So this here, this is a separate symbol, okay, the natural symbol. If we hit Z, that will open our symbol menu. Remember I said we'd be using these a lot, okay, these things here. So we hit Z, that opens our symbols menu. Unfortunately, Sibelius doesn't have any method of searching through these, so you kind of just have to scroll down until you reach whatever you're looking for, and then you miss it, and you have to scroll back up again. And then we put in our natural sign, and we're able to do it. So this means A is trilling to B natural. Now, we can edit it so that we could make a line where the symbol is part of the line, which is really handy because it means if I start moving this around, you'll see the accidental comes with it, okay, rather than being separate. So this is one of those kind of situations where if I was to extract this from a full score into the part, the accidental might have, strayed over there or up here or somewhere, and I'll have to move it back. Whereas if it's part of the line, then it won't have moved. So to do that, I did what I was talking about earlier, where I edited one of the lines. So I went to trill, and I wanted to make a new trill. And then what I wanted to do was to put a new symbol in. Okay. So to do this, you have to select, over here. We want a new symbol at the start. So what's happening at the start of the line is in this menu. What's happening in the middle of the line is in this menu. And what's happening at the end of the line is in this menu. So you'll see we have nothing at the end of the line because the trill symbol doesn't end in anything. The middle is the symbol for this little vibrato sign here. And then at the start is the actual trill itself, the TR symbol. So you'll see when I click on that, it shows me that TR is what it is. Now, what I did was earlier I created a symbol which contained both the trill sign and an accidental. So if I click on that and I import that symbol, once it loads, you'll see that in the line now I have the trill and the sharp. So this would work again if I wanted to create one that had a trill and a flat, or a trill and a natural, or a trill and a microtone. And once we hit OK, that will now have appeared in our lines. To change a trill halfway through, we insert an accidental over the top of the trill where it changes. So this is trilling to B sharp until here, and then it trills to B natural. The other way to notate trills is to put a little note afterwards, and you do this via the keypad. And it's under the second menu, and I tend to use this one, which is pre-bend note. So if I click on this and load it, I can put a note sort of down here, okay? And then I can just kind of drag it around. Let's delete that one. we're going to have a trill downwards. Okay, and that can be added, you know, we can add any accidentals to it or whatever we need. Okay, let's move on to our next problem. If you have any questions about those, just feel free to put it in the chat and we'll try to come back to it. Okay, so the other thing someone was asking about was harmonics notation. Now, Elaine Gould, the writer of Behind Bars, who kind of has published the, you know, the industry standard on how to notate various things, says that generally speaking, for string players, the recommended approach is to just write harmonics as the player will finger them. Okay, they don't always need to see what the sounding pitch is. So, for example, this passage here, which was sent in, I actually don't think it's, now, you know, feel free to disagree with me as with any of these things, but I don't feel it's necessary for you to show the sounding pitch, because all of these string harmonics are fourths, fifths, or octaves. And so they're harmonics that the player will be fairly familiar with. When we want to show sounding pitches tends to be if it's a slightly unusual harmonic, or if there's lots of combinations and we want to show exactly what we want. Okay, but having said that, I decided to sort of try and put the sounding pitches in. Now, the question was mainly about how to put sounding pitches in without creating a huge mess, you know, of trying to put in lots of voices. Unfortunately, that is kind of generally the way to put them into Sibelius. So you'll see down here, and this was what the composer had originally done, was to create a second voice, okay, which is done by these keypads here, or by the shortcuts, the Alt key, and then whatever voice you're trying to create. So if I wanted to create a third voice, I would hit Alt 3, and then you'll see that this has changed here, and now I have a third voice loaded in my mouse. So this here is actually the first voice, and I have changed this to a small note head. And actually, what I presume the composer did as well is this is a note head. I actually edited the note heads, the small note heads, so that they wouldn't have a stem, wherever the small note heads are. There we go. So if I click on the small note head selection and edit, you'll see that I've unselected a stem. If I had it on, then when that note appeared, it would have a stem attached to it. So I would have to do something about that. If you have lots of small note heads in your score, but some of them need stems, that's a situation where you would create a new note head style with a stemless small note head so that you have it for this. The one thing I would have changed about the way this composer had notated it was this was sitting directly above this. And again, Gould recommends that if you can, if the stem is going to collide with it, that you set this slightly off to the right. Always bracket it, never combine it with the stem of this, because otherwise it looks like a chord, and the player can be uncertain of what exactly you're wanting here. Do you want a 3-note chord? I mean, I feel this one's fairly obvious, but just for the sake of clarity, you want to make sure that this is a separate element. This is what the result is, not what you want them to play. The other option, if you've got a long passage of harmonics, like this up here, if these were complex harmonics, the best solution is probably to write the sounding pitches in an osseous staff above. So to create an osseous staff, I click on a staff that doesn't have anything above it. I go to Home, and then osseous staffs are here under Instruments. So I can add one below, or I can add one above. And sometimes I'll use this if I've got an instrument which, say, is being required to sing or something, rather than adding another instrument, then I would, or creating an instrument which has 2 staves. Say you have a flautist and they're being required to sing a separate line, then I would use an osseous staff above it. So you would maybe highlight, you know, what you want to have the osseous staff, click above, and then it automatically puts it up here, and we can put extra notes in here. So for this, I have used this to show what the sounding pitches of these harmonics are. Please don't judge me if some of them are wrong. I tried to work them out. And that's also what I've done here. So that's a good option, I feel, for if you've got a lot of harmonics to do. The only other thing I'd point out is just that, and this is maybe down to string players' preference, but this takes up less space than this, and I feel notes like sol, things like sol G and sol D tend to be used if you've got like a long passage which is on the same string, or you've got a note which the player won't automatically assume is going to be on that string. We know this is going to be on the G string because we can't get it on the D string unless we're using scordatura. So generally speaking, I tend to use the note numbers, and I can never actually remember which way around they go. So this might be right. It might actually be 1 and 2, but a string player will correct you on that. The other handy thing to know is there is, you know, we talked earlier about plugins. There is a plugin which will put harmonics in your score, put sounding pitches. So the plugin is called String Harmonics Sounding Pitch, but it only works if you've got a normal note head and a diamond note head. So let's put one in just so I can show you how this works. So there's a note, and we're going to change that to a diamond. Okay, now with that selected, I'm going to go to my plugins where I installed this earlier. And I'm looking for String Harmonics Sounding Pitch. So here it is. I select it. It brings up a little menu with the kind of things it's going to do. I just want to hit OK for the moment. And it's going to, there we go. It's going to automatically for me place in the sounding pitch. And it's going to do everything for me. It's going to make this the stemless note head and so on, and just put it there, which is great. Now, the thing is, it won't work for stuff like this because this is just 2 diamond note heads. These are both normal note heads, so it won't work if you just run it over your entire score. It will only work for string harmonics when you have a normal note head and a diamond note head. Okay, let's move on. Now, this one requires a lot of time. So if you've a lot of time on your hands, then feel free to kind of do this as much as you want. Sibelius is not designed for making polymetrical music, unfortunately, which is a real pain. But it can do it. What we need to do, however, is to fool it into doing it. Okay, so here I have this passage of polymetrical music with 5/4 and 9/8. Now, again, I talked earlier about the kind of process of problem solving. So let's take a bit of a moment to look at this and to figure out how we're going to do this. The first thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make time signatures, okay? Because Sibelius won't let us have separate time signatures in separate staffs, okay? So you'll actually see my first step with this solution was to create the time signature and then to hide it. You remember how I told you this button was going to be really useful? Okay, so I've actually created this excerpt in 5/4. So the whole score is in 5/4. Sibelius thinks this is in 5/4, but visually you can see that it's not. Okay, so the first thing I did was I hid the time signature, and I can show that again if I want. I then made fake time signatures to put over the top. Okay, so again, this is where we would go to text and we would want to edit a text style. Or actually, we don't need to do that for this because Sibelius already has one loaded. If I go to text and go to other staff text, you'll see I have an option here called time signatures 1 staff only. So that means I will create a text, which is only a text. It doesn't function as anything else in Sibelius, but it will have the same font and the same size as time signatures. So there you go. I have a wee fake time signature here. Now I'm going to want to turn off the magnetic layout for it so that, sorry, I just did that with a key command, by the way. I told you I used it a lot. So you can see that for this object, the magnetic layout is off, and that means I can move it about as much as I want without Sibelius trying to mess up the spacing I'm working with. So I don't need that for the moment. So these two are both fake time signatures. They're both made with a text style. The other thing just to point out, actually, just while we're here about this extract, was this composer sent, I think it was this composer, sent in dynamics that looked like this, okay? So to get dynamics, we hit Control E when we click on a note. Control and E. Okay, that gets us up this little text box here, and we can then type a dynamic. But you'll notice that these dynamics aren't in the correct font, and this can be quite bad for musicians to try read, especially if there's low lighting. They just aren't very thick and they don't stand out very much. So we want to make them into the font, the normal font for Sibelius. Why Sibelius makes them like this in the first place, I don't really know. But you know, that's none of my business. To make them into the proper font, what we need to do is we hit Control E. You then need to hold down the Control button while you type in the dynamic. So if I want a mezzo forte, I hold the Control button down, I type M and I type F, and you'll see that already I have the font that I require. Another quick handy shortcut for this, just for dynamics, is H is the shortcut for a hairpin, and Shift H is for a diminuendo, which can just speed up a lot of time. But we'll talk about that if we get time. Okay, so then what I did next was I kind of went through and, you know, put in all the notes that I needed for these time signatures. This instrument up here, because it's in 5/4 and my original time signature is in 5/4, I don't need to do anything with these bar lines. So these are actual bar lines. These, however, are fake. They're just lines which I've made and put over the top. Okay. Now, again, Sibelius actually has a plugin that does this. We saw it earlier. I click on plugins and I go down, add fake bar lines to bars. Okay, so this has given me a fake bar line, one of these lines. Now you could do it manually if you wanted, but this plugin has given me a fake bar line for every bar in the system that I'm then able to move around and to make the bars where I want. This instrument, the flute, we talked about editing instruments earlier. If we go to my edit instrument box, you'll see I have 2 flutes, and that's because the flute actually has no bar lines. Edit staff type, you'll see that I have no bar lines for this flute, because otherwise what I'd end up with is actually 2 sets of bar lines. I would have a bar line, oh, why is that not moving? No, it's just slow. I would have a bar line here where the actual bar line is meant to be. I would have a bar line here and so on. So I had to make an instrument without bar lines, then put in these fake bar lines and move them around as I wanted. Now, the final thing this composer was asking about was beaming, because obviously we want to beam this correctly so that it's clear that this is in 9/8 and this is in 5/4. All the beaming instructions are down here in the keypad, okay? And the main ones we'll want to use are these 3 here: start beam, middle of beam, and end beam, okay? So if I want to beam things together, down here, the composer was asking about some specific sort of beaming. To beam these 3 together, if I click on this note, you'll see that I've changed it to be the end of the beam. Whereas if it's not, Sibelius will automatically try to beam these 4 together because it's in 5/4. So that would be correct beaming for this. So if you want to do something that goes against that, you need to do it manually. And that's how I was able to do all of these. To create a stemlet, which is this little line here that connects to the rest, is this button here. So if I click on that, you'll see stemlet is highlighted. If I take it off, it removes it, which is fine, but sometimes in more complex music, when there's a lot going on and there's a lot of rests, it can be helpful for the performer to see stemlets. Some performers find it easier to read without them, so you're kind of best asking performers what their preference is. So that's how to change each of them. Now, the one thing I would say about this extract is the composer wanted this to still be in 5/4 and 9/8, but to have this specific beaming. This is a lot of very small groups of beaming for 5/4, which I think is a little hard to read. So I would have actually gone with your original solution, which is to give it, to break it up into semi-quaver beats and so on. And I think this is much more readable. We can still have the 9/8 beneath it. You can ask about that if you want. Okay, we don't need that. Now we're running over. I'm sorry. I knew there would be a lot to talk about. If you need to leave, feel free to leave. I will maybe just show, let's see, what other problems do I have?
And should we just ask if anybody has questions now?
Yes, okay. I have two more problems to go through, but I'm happy to take some questions now if you'd like.
If there's anybody. I'm afraid I can't see anybody if you have your hand up or anything, because Anselm is screen sharing. So if anybody has a question, if you could unmute yourself and ask the question. Otherwise, Anselm will continue on with his other two problems presented. And okay, sounds like there's...
Okay, I've either utterly bamboozled you all, or I've managed to explain it. One of the two.
I'm just fascinated by your fake this and fake... I thought fake news and everything. But
yeah, I mean, to be honest, a lot of my scores, everything is faked. That's the way to create things here. Okay, here's a slightly more crazy example. This is from Kaya Chernowin's Ania crystal. Okay, and I wanted to use this just to... No, I'll show you another really zany example in a moment. But this is just to... I'm not going to take you through entirely how I did this because it would just be too long, but this is just to show you kind of how we would go about dealing with a complex example like this. You can do... It takes time. It takes a lot of time, but we could do things like entirely reproduce handwritten George Crumb scores. I was looking at Black Angels the other day, the string quartet. You could make that in Sibelius. I wouldn't, because I think the handwritten score is so beautiful. It's amazing, and it would seem slightly sacrilegious to try. But just so you know that if you want to, you can create really complex notation in this. And it's all about figuring out how to use these tools that we were talking about earlier and figuring out how to combine them in an imaginative way to get the result that you're trying. So this score would take forever to notate, but I managed to do this little extract here. So first, let's analyze it. Chernowin likes to use a lot of time signatures with fractions. So that was the first thing to kind of deal with and come up with this slightly crazy looking time signature here. And then irrational time signatures as well, where the beat is, where the length of the beats is divided into tuplets. So for example, this is a 5/6 bar. This is 5 beats of triplet crotchet length, rather than 5/4, which would be 5 beats of crotchet length. Thomas Addas uses these a lot as well. Again, both of these are fake. They're text symbols, okay, that I've created. And this one actually is 5 different text symbols because this one was quite hard to make. Another option to do with a way to do this would be to make it in a graphic software so that it's all stuck together. It's all one symbol, and then import it in and place it there. So you'll see if I move this one, that is what my actual time signature is. Now, actually, because that's 5/4, I didn't really need to hide that. I could have just kept it and then there. Now, this down here, and unfortunately, the only thing I wasn't able to do was I wasn't able to create, you'll see this isn't entirely accurate. For a start, I got the symbol the wrong way around. She actually has the white side on the left and the black side on the other. But you see the point. And the other thing is I couldn't figure out how to get the ledger line to sit above my custom note head. Now there would be ways around that, but it was going to take me too long, so I didn't bother. Most of this is Sibelius. The only thing that isn't is this here, which is the beam, which is a curved beam. So what I did let's start with the beam. What I did was I made this passage without the secondary beam. Okay, so to do that, these notes had to be quavers so that when I beamed them all together, they would just be quavers. I used the beaming box in the keypad to link them all together. So you'll see these are all kind of middle of beam notes. I then had to make my custom note head. Okay, so let's go over to notations and see this in practice. If I click on note heads and go down, okay, this is my custom note heads that I've created here. So to do that, the first thing I had to do, as we talked about earlier, was I had to go into symbols and make a new symbol Okay, and there's my new symbol there, which was made in a graphic software separately. So once that was made, I then put it into my symbols dialog. I then have access to that as a symbol in Sibelius. I then click on my note heads. I make a new note head set, and I change the symbol to my custom symbol. And there we will have it. Now, sometimes when you do this, the symbol ends up in the wrong place. So you need to do a little bit of experimenting about. This here is quite helpful. Shorten stem, stem down, move note head to the right, move note head to the left. You might need to do a little bit of experimenting with that to get it to line up correctly, because Sibelius will assume that it's just a normal note head, like a little oval, and you might need to move things around a little. Okay, so that's what these were. And then these are just lines. L, menu, line. There we go. Turn magnetic layout off so I can freely move them around. And then I showed you how to do dynamics earlier and so on. This here, which is showing just how long this, this extract is, and you'll see she's got that little symbol up there. Again, it's just symbols that Sibelius already has. So these are separate. If I hit symbols, and I go to notes, okay, that was just a symbol of the minim. And then this is just a dot. Okay, so those are separate. And then this here, as I said, this was made in a graphic software separately. So what I did, which I do a lot, was I exported this as a PDF once I had this made, this bit here. I then put it into my graphic software, and I used that to figure out how wide this beam was, because I wanted this to be the exact same width. And then in the graphic software, I made a straight line. I put it onto here. And then in the graphic software, I was able to edit it so that I could get these kind of curves moving up and down like she has. I then deleted the original image, which was this. And I was just left with this. Then coming back into Sibelius, go into notations, I was able to click on graphic, and then I was able to select it from my computer and put it in, resize it as I wanted, and put it over the top. Okay, just to show you what kind of thing you can do with this, where is my example here? You can go as far off the deep end as you like with this kind of combination by using a graphic software. And in your handout, I'll have put a couple of links to free graphic softwares and then what is kind of the best. So Adobe Illustrator would be the go-to to use for graphics. I use a free software called Inkscape, which is incredibly buggy and quite laggy. So it's all right, but it gets done what you need to get done. But you'll see here, here's a score where actually I've used very little actually normal notation. And this is a combination of things that are native to Sibelius and then graphics that I've just kind of put in. So if we zoom in a little, this here, this big weird looking thorn thing was made in a graphic software, and then I just imported it in. So it's only one image and I can just kind of move it around and do whatever I want with it. These here are lines that are native to Sibelius. So what I did was I have over here notations, I have lines. I created a line, which let's just do it again for sake of argument. Here's the line. I wanted dashed lines. I wanted them to be thicker than that. And I can even customize how far apart they are and so on. And then I just put them all in. Let's zoom out a little and see some other things. Okay, these again, these are all graphics that I put into Sibelius, these kind of lollipop things. Although I made sure to make sure these lines are actually the same width as a note stem would be in Sibelius, which is 0.15 millimeters. So all that kind of information can be looked up and found so that you can edit it. Here's the situation. Oh, okay. So here's the situation where I didn't do the best thing I could have done, which is all these all of these have bar rests, which I have obviously painstakingly gone through and deleted or hidden. I didn't need to do that. I could have just made an instrument without any rests, as I showed you kind of at the start of the session. And that would have made, that would have cut 10 minutes off the work time for this. These are electronics that are happening here. So here's a situation where you might use something like a single percussion stave and then put stuff over the top. It's actually loop pedals that are being used in this. So here's where the loop pedal is recording. It's on, and then it's taken off. Let's see. Is there anything else interesting in here? Yeah, not overly. So that score, although it looks slightly crazy, wasn't that complicated to make, because a lot of them are images that are taken from something else and then just put in. Something like this, which combines graphics and something that had to be made in Sibelius, takes slightly more time and a little more nuance because I had to move stuff around. Okay, let's go to a final example, and then we'll, if we've got any time left, we can chat. So this box notation, when it finally loads here, is something that is very useful for, oh, that's why it's not loading. No, I don't want to make save changes. Box notation is very useful for aleatoric scores. You'll have seen it in Lutoslawski, Penderecki, and so on. So it's quite useful to be able to do it in Sibelius. So below here is what the composer wanted, okay, which was a set of boxed notes that are just going to kind of continue on randomly and move across. Okay, so again, let's analyze our problem and figure out what separate elements we need to do. We're going to need to make a series of stemless note heads. Those are going to be done in Sibelius. Now, the way they're grouped, I'm probably going to want to make this a quintuplet. So here is where we talked earlier about tuplets and how it could be useful to have tuplets if we want to kind of fit things into smaller spaces, because a lot of aleatoric music relies on spatial notation. So it's important how far one note head is away from the next. So I'll probably, this looks roughly as if it's fitting in the first beat. It's slightly over, but we'll not mind that. Let's put it slightly more in the first beat. So we're going to make this out of a quintuplet. We're going to make them stemless, and then we're going to hide the chuplet. Now the next thing we'll need to do then is put a box around the note heads. Again, something we do in Sibelius. We don't need a plugin. We don't need to do a graphic for that. There's a very thick line coming from the box, which is showing how long this is going to last for. Again, not something we need to do outside of Sibelius. The only other complication is that this is, I think this is the clarinets. Yep, it is the clarinets. There are two clarinets. So this will all need to be in the second voice, and the top part will need to be in the first voice. So up we come to our solution. You'll see here that these are actually semiquavers, and it's a quintuplet, okay? But I've clicked on the quintuplet symbol and I've hidden it. I've also made these in my notations. I've made them stemless, okay? So that we can't see the stem as well. Now the box was under lines. Now when I normally create a box, the box isn't thick enough. We talked about this earlier. So I would click on the box, I would edit it. I would make it whatever thickness I thought was best. And you can see, yeah, that looks much more sturdy. Or if you were going for something really fine, it could be really fine instead. Okay, so there's our box and we just put it around there. As I said, this is all in the second voice we can see, and this is in the first voice. Then the next thing I did was make a line, and I made the line nice and thick and just inserted it. Again, I needed to turn off the magnetic layout for this. You'll see the magnetic layout is off so that it can sit with it. And then finally, this is, again, is a symbol native to Sibelius. This is a C clef, which was found under more clefs. And it's just because that was what I wanted to kind of put at the end. It's up to you. You can make, as we saw earlier, you could make the line so that it has an end to it. So let's see, which is the line I made. Oh, it doesn't matter. Let's just edit this one. So remember, this edits the start of the line, this edits the middle of the line, and this edits the end of the line. So at the end of the line, I want to have a symbol, I want to have an arrow. Let's make it a triangle. And I could put it in that way. So I now have a line with the triangle at the end of it. Now the reason, just in this case, that I didn't do that was because when I did that, because the line was so thick, the arrow was huge. So you'd have to do a bit of experimenting to kind of get what you're looking for. Okay, the other thing this composer was looking for was this kind of, oh dear. So this is a good situation of where you need to create a new line. This was my line, okay? This was my normal line, but these now have arrows on the end of them. And that's because I edited the main line. So I need to edit that back and take off the arrow. If I wanted a line with an arrow, I'd be better off creating a new line and making that the line with the arrow, because otherwise every line in my score is going to have an arrow at the end of it. And sometimes you just don't want that. Okay, so let's look at the other thing, which was this here. Okay, so again, let's analyze the problem. What are we going to need to do? This is a couple of combinations of things. Firstly, there's two voices, so we're going to need things in separate voices. It's in semiquavers. We're going to need semiquavers. We're going to need a couple of headless note heads here. We're going to need to create a slash for like a grace note. And then this is the main problem here, which is getting these beamed lines. But again, and this is just because I've been doing this for a while, looking at it, I know that I can do all of those things in Sibelius fairly easily. Again, I've made it with tuplets and hidden the tuplet. The reason being that this looks as if it comes about halfway through the second beat, but it's semiquavers. So what I've done is I've created 8 semiquavers in the time of 6. So 6 semiquavers would take me up to the middle of that second beat, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, if I'm being really accurate to what the composer has written down. So that's what I did for these. If I move that out of the way, you can see that these are mine here, okay? These were then headless note heads, which is kind of an oxymoron. Okay, there we have our headless note heads, just stems. And I actually changed these to be small note heads because I feel it indicates more that kind of grace note style, which the composer is going for. These then are both lines. Now, this is a useful situation for seeing where magnetic layout can be. Oh, it's actually not. Sometimes when I do this, the lines will go through here just fine. Sometimes they will sit above here and they will refuse to be moved. That's where you would want to switch off the magnetic layout. Okay, so the next thing is these beams here. And these are all, again, just lines that have been made to various thicknesses, depending on what I wanted, and then put over the top of what already existed. Now, this is a case of where this is going to take some time. And if you're doing anything complex like this, I would recommend leaving it right until the end of typesetting your score. For the reason that if I do something as simple as this, I take these two and I make them into a system. Oh no, that's actually done all right. Let's do that one. Okay, Sibelius kind of messes up the look of my lines now. So what I want to do is I don't really want, no, that's all right, actually, as it is, but sometimes it will just send them like, you know, all over the place. So I'd recommend that this is kind of the last stage of what you do. So you set it up, you set up what you're going to do, but then you come back and do it later once your layout is sorted and you know you aren't going to be moving things around and making things on different pages or so on. Okay, so those are the problems I was sent in. There were a couple of other questions which I might address. One thing just to say was a general comment on workflow efficiency. And I find this quite important. If you spend most of your time clicking and using the mouse, you're going to be here a while. If this is your method for working, and then moving back here and doing that, it's just going to take you forever. Okay, so the quickest way to kind of get quicker at Sibelius is to memorize the shortcuts. What numbers and what keys you need to press to be able to get results quickly. And then there's various other options. You can set up your Android phone so that it has quick buttons on it, so that you can hit a button on your Android or your iPhone or whatever, and it will just do it in Sibelius. I tried to be cool, and I have a gaming mouse that you'll see has lots of buttons on it. Each of these buttons has been programmed so that it does something in Sibelius. So, for example, if I click on this note here, and I want to move it up an octave, that one there, okay? Or if I click down, I can move it down an octave, and I can do lots of different things. I also have the option to, I have a couple of different setups, so if I change this, I can hit that and hide it. So if there's a lot of functions that you find yourself using a lot, but they require a lot of clicking to find, the easiest thing to do is set up a keyboard shortcut to them in Sibelius and then link it to something like a mouse or your phone or whatever. And then you'll be able to just, you know, with one click, you'll be able to do it. To set up your keyboard preferences or to find out what preferences exist, although I have included a lot of them in your handout, go to File and down here under Preferences. And under Preferences, we have keyboard shortcuts. Fantastic. Now, again, this is not searchable, so you'll need to find whatever feature you're trying to change. So let's say, for example, I have one loaded in already. I use boxes a lot, so I'm going to click on Line Style, Box, and then you'll see that there's a keyboard shortcut loaded in. So if I want to add a keyboard shortcut, I add that, I press whatever keys I want, and it will add, you then need to click OK for it to apply. Then just for my workflow, I went over to the mouse and I changed the mouse so that when I hit a certain button, it activates that key command of Control, Shift, and the little dash. And so Sibelius thinks I'm pressing those keys and it just loads a box for me. So box is just one click away for me, rather than having to open the lines menu and do all that sort of thing.
And
okay.
And so yes. I'm just going to ask a question here as a total non-composer. Is it difficult to program that mouse? Is that something that, you know,
well, I actually had quite a bit of difficulty doing it on my other computer, which is why I'm on this computer today, because it's Windows native. Mac is horrendous for doing any of these sorts of things, although it's great for music. So if you buy like a gaming mouse, they generally come with software that you can then open and then just load your key commands into. So they are reasonably intuitive, and a quick search on the internet will get you a tutorial for how to do it. Just make sure that whatever mouse you buy, that the software that comes with it is downloadable to your computer, because if you buy a really new mouse and you have an old computer, your computer might not be able to run the software that comes with it, and so then you're kind of just left with a mouse that just works as a mouse.
Okay.
But I've given lots of options in the workflow efficiency thing of the handout, just for, because not everyone prefers to work in that way. So I've given a couple of different options for what you can do. I know some composers who use drawing pads. So they have like a drawing tablet and they have a pen and they use that to create stuff in graphic software and then put it into Sibelius, or vice versa. That's a great way to do things, because then it has the actual tactile feeling of you drawing or writing something. I'm maybe going to come out of screen share, just so I can kind of, because I can only see myself.
Yeah, I know.
So nice, I feel like I've been talking into the ether.
Great.
We still have some people here. Excellent.
Oh yeah, a lot of people. Very silently stunned or impressed or all of the above. So if everybody wants to take off their mute, and if anybody wants to just chat, ask questions. First of all, before everybody tucks in, I just want to thank Anselm for fantastic run through. I'm a lawyer by profession. Yeah. I'm a lawyer by profession, and if you saw me smiling, it's because I was thinking that Anselm would make a fantastic expert witness. Because mostly you have an expert, the judge knows nothing. And in my case, I know nothing about composition, the actual manufacturing, the making of it. But even I could kind of follow what Anselm was saying. So I was thinking, oh my God, I could actually let him loose on a judge and not be too worried. So that's a big compliment, Anselm.
And they'll just be able to make Ladislawski scores after it.
So anybody who has any questions, just wave your hand or, you know, shout out or whatever. I saw Marion was delighted anyway with the polymetric thing.
Yeah, I've always wondered, you know, I know it's troublesome and that, but it's actually doable. So I'm delighted. I'd be really delighted to try that out. So thanks a million.
I mean, most things are doable. They just require experimentation and time.
Yeah. But I like your approach to the problem, you know, systematic. Yeah. Thanks a million. No, I have no questions. I'm sure I'll have after I've gone, but yeah, it's fantastic. Loads of food for thought. Thanks a million.
And we also have quite a few performers here, and I've encouraged them before. I have Lindsay coming back in. I've encouraged them to. I know this is an hour of your life or whatever, but performers often have to try to interpret. I mean, creating these symbols is one thing, but then also understanding them as a performer is another thing. And we've a conductor here. My God, Sinead, you must be. You're on mute.
Yeah, that was great. Fantastic, Anselm. Really, really great. I mean, I have to say the polymetric thing does give me the sweats if I'm thinking about more than one performer. So I think certainly if you're going to use it, think about if you have a conductor, a poor soul like myself, how it's going to work in performance. Because if I'm beating against something that's very clearly marked in the score, it's very, very tricky for the performance. I mean, I've never had any trouble with your scores, Anselm. I have to say they've been fantastic, but just maybe
I give the conductor big numbers. You know, 1, 2, 3.
We like big numbers. Big numbers are great. Yeah, they're really good. But I think even just you know, if you have a 5/4 and a 9/8, maybe even just have some kind of I don't know, dotted bar lines just to show when you're divvying it out, because what we inevitably end up doing is kind of pencil marking in those beats so that we can kind of get it together. If there's more than, I said, 3 players, it becomes slightly more problematic. But yeah, really, really great presentation. Love that.
Thank you. Sorry I went on so long, everyone, but
no, thank you.
Hopefully stuff has been helpful.
Yeah, you're getting lots of lovely fan mail here in the chat box, Anselm, so that's always nice. And it's also very difficult to speak to such a wide audience. I mean, I know most of the people on this, and they're coming from very different avenues. So it was that's nice too, because how it's all received is on different planes, let's say. But polymetrics gets the 10 out of 10. The 12 points in the Eurovision, it goes to the polymetric. That's getting the most comments.
It's not something I've ever done in Sibelius, partly just because it would take so long to do. So if you have the commitment to do it, good on you.
Yeah, well, and also Anselm, he tells me, I haven't had a chance to read through his written brief that I'll have to brief up on later, but you know, he has probably contact details on that if you have questions, because he brings some composers through this as, I suppose, a little sideline, and it's sometimes useful just to get a short bit of advice, and then you're back on your way.
Yeah, so I do some private tuition and some engraving work, but not like an opera or something, because I don't have time for that. So, you know, if that's useful to you or anyone you know, feel free to pass on my details. Yeah.
And Sinead, just back to you, I always think of conductors in the dark, you know, in a concert hall in the dark. And I know you have this tiny little light like a bicycle and the huge scores. I don't know how you do it.
Lots of markings really, really helps. And yeah, I have to say, I do love the big time signatures. They just make my life much, much easier.
And that's another benefit of something like this. And we've had some internal sort of, let's say, coffee mornings with composers and performers, where the people who are on the receiving end, or Eilish Kerrigan is beamed in there from Germany, who is a singer. And, you know, they are actually passing on to our composers some sort of helpful hints for where they're trying to interpret, or conductors or whatever. That's all useful, because as Anselm has made very clear throughout his presentation, a lot of it is clarity, you know, actually, so that it actually does what it says on the tin, as it were, rather than everybody confused. So is there any actual further questions? I mean, it was great to have had the opportunity to put in problems, and we got loads of them, and we didn't identify who had raised them, because it's better, it's one size fits all. But hopefully those of you who did put in problems to be fixed or questions to be answered, if you have any further and better details that you require, just pipe up now or email us later. We're good?
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for your attention and your perseverance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And you're very welcome. I'll send his brief out to everybody. And thank you all very much. Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Very helpful.
Bye-bye.